Thank you for coming out. Welcome to the very first Ask Me About Real Estate live stream. I hope you can see this. That's what my shirt says. That was my inspiration. We are just going to talk about real estate. Literally, this is where buyers, sellers, tenants, landlords can finally get straight answers in real time. We're going to talk about everything that's actually happening in the market right now. I've got some market updates. We're going to talk about foreclosure trends, what to expect in 2026. Nothing's off limits. Drop your questions in the chat. Let's make it interactive. Let's make it fun. Make sure you walk away smarter, more confident, and ready for whatever the market throws at you. Geez, that we're asking a lot. We're going to try to deliver a lot today. And at the end of the day, if nobody bothers to watch, if it's just like my mom watching, that's it. It's okay. It's okay. We just wanted to try this out. I love having guests on, but I also just want to answer your questions, whatever they may be. So, first things first, we got Michelle in the background, making sure everybody keeps it clean. Couldn't do this without Michelle. Thank you for being there. She's been there. We've done over 50 live streams, and she's been there the whole time. So, thank you for that, Michelle. And look, I know it's about halfway through December, and Christmas and New Year's and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa are around the corner. So you got other things you should be doing, of course, for the holidays, like shopping for sugar plums or whatever it is you do. But we appreciate it if you come out here and you're asking questions. Other important things, remember, I can't give tax or legal advice, but for the most honest and up-to-date real estate advice, make sure you subscribe to this channel. So, where do you want to start first? How about we start with a market update? I'm going to dive into some of the data. I actually released this yesterday, and it's worth resharing this. November was a crazy month, and I want to show you exactly what I mean by that. So here we go, market update. And we are looking at November data. We're going from 2025 all the way back to 2018. Why am I doing that? I'm doing that because 2018, 2019, those were more normal years. 2020 was COVID through about 2022, and then 2023 and beyond, theoretically, COVID not affecting the market. You can see that black line, that's mortgage interest rates. So back in 2020, no real estate agent was allowed to say, oh, you should buy because of the rates. And the truth is, you shouldn't buy just because of the rates. You should buy if it makes sense for you to buy. Well, I think some people were wishing they would have bought everything. Even before then, like when we compare median home price, you wish you would have bought more. But shoulda, coulda, woulda. You could always buy at a peak. You could buy at a trough. It has to be when you're ready to go. All-nighter, thanks for coming up, bud. You're out of the area. You're he's in Gary, Indiana. What the heck? I know you're doing some real estate stuff, so I appreciate you being out there. And we've already got a first question. That's great. Let's see. All right, we have 65. My home, I wanted to buy a second home, but I'm wondering if I'm too old for that. That's a great question, I'm glad you asked that question. So buying a second, you're never too old to buy real estate. Look, if it works for you and you're going to take full advantage of that second home, then it may make sense to do that. The bigger question, look, All-Nighter agrees. Exactly. You're never too old. I mean, 65, you got another good 30, 40 years in you, Yanara. So definitely not an age thing. But what it has to do is it has to make sense for you to buy a second home. So you're going to need to talk to your CPA, because that whoever does your taxes, your financial advisor, they are going to run the numbers for you to make sure that it makes sense for you to actually be buying that second home. We're going to take the stats off for now. Let's talk in person. And the other thing is you got to come up with a plan, because there's ways to actually use a second home to actually offset your taxes in a smart way. So there's the Augusta rule, which is something that Taylor tax strategy, Greg Taylor, has talked about, where you can rent out your home for 14 days and essentially have free income from doing that. So really, when you go into it, don't look at it, hey, am I too old for a second home? What you have to look at, does it make sense for me? And then make sure the numbers make sense for you. And then the Elise is here. I appreciate you coming out, Elise. Yeah, Elise, you always ask good questions, so make sure you chime in with some. So yeah, so Yanira, definitely something to consider. Talk to your financial advisor, run the numbers to see if it makes sense for you to actually buy that second home. And then from there, dare to dream. Like, don't be afraid to go after that. But if there's better uses of your funds, your advisor is going to tell you that. So okay, I hope that helps. All right, so let's go back to the data. Keep those good questions coming in. This is the time of year where we have a lot of craziness going on because of the holidays, but it's also a good time to start planning for 2026. Now, dovetailing back into what Yanira was asking about buying a second home, there are advantages to investment properties where you get bonus depreciation because of the big beautiful tax bill if you do a cost segregation analysis. Look, this sounds like tax advice. It's not. These are the questions you bring up and you use to analyze the decision you're going to make. So the bonus depreciation allows you, after a cost segregation, to write off much more off your taxes. So that's, again, part of the strategy, and you can take advantage of that if you buy real estate this year or next. It's actually now permanently in the tax code until things change and it gets pulled out. So let's go back to the housing market in Southern California and all that craziness. So it's been interesting. This year, I continue to do my updates, and we had a buyer's market for a short time in Orange County. LA, to be honest, is still a bit of a buyer's market. I have a client, we're about to close escrow, and he just got an amazing deal because he was actually writing offers out there. And that's the key. A lot of people like to sit on the sidelines and talk about buying, but once you're ready and it makes sense for you, start writing offers. You're not going to get a place unless you write offers. And then if the plan, which it should be, is to buy and hold for a long time, then don't let some small dollar amount prevent you from ever buying. I've talked to investors who are always $5,000 away from ever tying up a property, and they talk about a few properties that got away. Don't let a small dollar amount dissuade you. I know it's easy for me to say it's not my money, but at the end of the day, if you're making a move at the right time and the plan makes sense for you, like, do it. Don't have yourself held back, because you're going to, over the long term, when you look back 20, 30 years from now, $5,000 because of inflation will be worth maybe a nickel. Okay, so mortgage interest rates have gone through the roof. We have a little bit of respite from the Fed fund rate being cut by 1/4 point. So Fed fund rate doesn't directly affect mortgage interest rates, but there is an indirect effect, the 10-year treasury, et cetera. So long story short, when we had a Fed cut last month, mortgage interest rates went up. This month they went down. So that's good, slightly. So we're not near those 2s and 3s that we were back in 2020, 2021. I was talking to another real estate agent. She put it well. She said that was a mistake that the government made back then. So it's unlikely where we're going to get rates like that. And quite frankly, folks are holding on to those low mortgage interest rates, and that's part of where the inventory is. So when you look at the new listings line, which is the red line for Orange County, it is down. We're at record low new listings, which means buyers who are out shopping right now don't have much choice in Orange County. LA, a little more choice, but still, that's actually a record low for number of new listings in LA. The white line, those are pending sales, so those are actually buyers writing. So despite what people are saying, buyers are out writing offers, and a little more choice in LA, and that's where I said we are seeing more of a buyer's market in LA. Riverside, we're down for new listings, not a record low, but we're up for pending sales. Same thing in San Bernardino. We saw the pending sales are up off their record lows. So buyers in more affordable markets are out there writing offers. Will these all turn into closed sales? No. There's always deals that fall apart. But this is a positive sign for these markets where we're seeing that. Ventura is always all over the place. I always give Ventura a hard time. Fewest number of properties there for all 6 of these SoCal counties. So we're just seeing the fewest number trade. And San Diego, this is a county that's very similar to Orange County on many levels, from pricing and inventory. And there's a slight difference there. They have slightly more inventory, not off the record lows. So San Diego, moving along. Always interesting to look back to the normal years. If we'll use normal with air quotes, can't see me right now because you're looking at my chart, but normal years. So you can see 2018, 3,555 new listings in November. That's almost double what we had in November this year. So a lot more inventory. So that's a quick update on what's going on in the single family market. And let's see, we got some other good questions. This is a great question. Okay, I like this one. And this is bought a property, but I want to get a survey done for the property lines. Why don't more people stress the importance of finding property lines? Great question. I'm so glad you brought this up. It is actually a regional thing. And in Ohio, where I grew up, lived there the first 20 years of my life, my dad was a custom home builder. And there, very often, you would have a survey done in the before you purchased a property. It was part of due diligence. And here, so here to continue, neighbors that have lived in the area 20 plus years, they don't want to move property lines. What's the likelihood of winning a case if the property lines are off? Well, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So let's say you decide in Southern California that you're going to go ahead and do a survey. You could do a survey on anything you buy, a small lot in Newport Beach that's 2,500 square feet. Do a survey if that's important to you. Then you know for sure. So what we tend to use here, we use the assessor map. The assessor map has measurements on there, but a survey is going to be absolutely the much more accurate way to go, and you're going to know where the property lines are. And what we tend to say is the fences are on the property lines. That's not always true, as you found out, and the reason you're asking this question. So should you do a survey? I can't say no. Does it make sense in every case? Maybe it does. But it's just something that isn't done as frequently here. So if you know that you're going to be doing construction at any point in time on the property, and I'm talking any type of construction. So you have a plan, you want to do an ADU, you want to redo the garage, you want to extend the house, you want to take advantage of SB 9, which allows lot splits, any of those things, if that's part of your plan in acquiring a property, then yes, absolutely have a survey done, because those things will all affect potentially what you can do. If you're buying a detached condo, you probably don't need a survey. I'm not going to say no, but probably don't need a survey. So great question. And yes, going back to the question about whether you can win the case. Yeah, at the end of the day, if the survey finds that the property lines are different from what everybody assumed. So I've seen cases where there's fences built where they shouldn't have been. I've seen cases where there's structures that straddle property lines. First thing you do after the survey, is you talk to the title company. So they're your first line of defense, if you will, because they warranted the property. Theoretically, there are cases where title insurance doesn't work anymore. There's unwarranted transfers that happen. But your first step is after the survey is you're going to reach out to the title company and have them help defend. If they won't, then I have other attorneys I can refer you to that deal with lot lines and surveys. All-nighter would be interesting to see if you've had any experiences with that. And just so you know, and once you find an issue with a property line, this becomes something that you must disclose if you sell that property. And I disclose it even if you took care of it, I'd still disclose it. But if you haven't fixed it, then definitely disclose it as a seller, and it could potentially sink the deal. It's possible that the lender for the buyer isn't going to buy the property. It's possible you can't get title insurance for the property. So it is a big deal. That was a great question. Yeah, in Ohio, we used to get them frequently because there, like where my dad was building out in rural Ohio, nobody had done an official survey. So there were no assessor maps. So you had to essentially do a survey just to double check everything. So, all right. So one of the things we haven't been able to cover yet, switching gears, and don't be afraid to ask any question about any topic, quite honestly. There's a lot of odds and ends I can talk about, and if I don't know the answer, I'll point you in the right direction. So one of the things I didn't get a chance to cover yet and maybe next week I will, is the foreclosures. So we've been tracking the foreclosure data, and the market's finally getting interesting for foreclosures. That is what we've noticed. It is definitely worth tracking, because what we had during the coronavirus, during COVID, was we actually had a case where it didn't really make sense to track because there weren't any going on. So let's go ahead and dive into this data. Okay, so what we're showing you here, we have notices of default for November. So Michelle crunched these numbers. We get them from ICE, and they're sometimes inaccurate. It's a very frustrating thing. It's all public knowledge, should be accurate, but it's not. So Michelle does her best, and then we double check these numbers repeatedly. This is the best data that we have, and anybody has, because where everybody's getting the data is the same place. So notice of default, we're going back to 2015 here. This puts it in perspective. And you can see 2020, 2021, that dip, well, that was when we were in COVID and we had a foreclosure moratorium. Then things started to rally back. Now, foreclosure moratorium was specifically for Fannie and Freddie backed properties, FHA properties, VA properties, different rules, but it was for those properties. Private mortgages, portfolio mortgages, so other places people get money, they didn't have any special protections necessarily. So that's why these numbers were very small, but not zero, because there were still people that were being foreclosed on. Some landlords, there were no protections for some landlords, and their tenants didn't have to pay rent for 3+ years in LA. So some landlords lost their properties because of this. So what we can see is things in any given market, so 2015 through 2019, normal markets, again, normal with air quotes, still people going through foreclosure. It's what happens. Any market, people are going to lose their properties. There's death, divorce, different things that happen. So what we then saw, we saw the big dip, and then things have come back. And what we're seeing here now, in past reports, we've seen where the notice of default, the first phase, the first public phase, was higher than 2015. So our last data set, which was September, actually, we missed October. The last data set from September showed that there were significantly more notices of default. Here for November, we're not seeing a huge increase. It is also a time of year where we tend to get fewer notices of default filed because of the holidays. So now when we bring in data from 2011, we can see that a lot of notices of default in 2011, but we were still coming out of it as far as notices of default goes. We had actually saw a reduction by 2011. Now we get into the next phase, the notice of trustee sale. So notice of default, that first step, that is, you miss a payment and a minimum of 120 days later, a notice of default can be filed. The next step, which would be 90 days later, is the notice of trustee sale. Things are getting serious when you get the notice of trustee sale, because it's going to have a sale date. That's what the notice of trustee sale says. So all these properties here received an actual sale date, and it'll be 21 days minimum beyond the delivery of the notice of trustee sale. So that's the process. It's a non-judicial foreclosure process in the state of California. What that means is it doesn't need to go in front of a judge. Some states it does. That's a slower process. The average foreclosure timeline across the nation, when you bring all of it together, you're looking at 800 days plus, 900 sometimes. I've seen it as high as 1,300 days from missing a payment to being foreclosed on. So it's not a quick process. So notice of trustee sale for November, we see it's up slightly, and that is taking into account the fact that we've had more notices of default. So it's up slightly, but nowhere near where it was in 2015. And then you really get perspective when you see 2011. So a lot of homeowners in this phase of foreclosure, the scary phase, not that there's not any non-scary phase of foreclosure, but the scary phase. So you can see in LA, 2,400 notices of default in the month of November. That's a lot of notices of default. Then we get into REO. So what happens is REO stands for real estate owned. So after the property is foreclosed on at the auction, so there is an auction, you go to the courthouse steps and there's a bunch of people bidding. Do not go. We'll talk about that in a second. Remind me to talk about that. So real estate owned mean that they're owned by the bank. The real estate is owned by the bank. It goes back to the bank, or the beneficiary is more technical. So you can see that 2020, there just weren't as many properties making their way through. It dropped because this is a late stage of foreclosure. We see an increase in LA. That's up year over year. 30 properties going back to the bank in the month of November, one a day. Seems like a lot. But then you put it into perspective. 2015, we had 122 in the month. And then, holy smokes, 1,215 properties going back to the bank in Los Angeles in November of 2011. That's a lot of properties. And that's what we see was happening during the global financial crisis. So when you have 1,200 properties going back to the bank, plus you have existing inventory, and that existing inventory includes standard sellers. So people who just wanted to go ahead and put their home on the market. And even though it was a lousy time because it was a global financial crisis, that includes people that were going through short sales. If you remember back then, a lot of people were in foreclosure or about to go into foreclosure, and they ended up doing what was known as a short sale. So they owed more in financing against the property than the property was worth. And I'll explain why in a minute. And in that case, they were underwater or over encumbered. So they were able to sell the property. They'd work with the lenders, and the lenders would allow them to sell for less. And at the time, we had legislation that forgave that debt. Right now, if you sell a property because you're over encumbered and you have debt forgiven, let's say it's worth 500, you have 600 in loans, you sell it for 5, you got 100,000 in forgiven debt. That's phantom income. You get taxed on that. During the global financial crisis, for several years, people weren't taxed on that. So how did people get over encumbered? I was just having this discussion today. You youngins, I'm getting old enough, I'm allowed to say you youngins now, but you youngins who may not remember or may not have been aware of what was going on during the global financial crisis. And it's important to understand because you hear sometimes the crash bros saying, oh my gosh, we got 2008 happening again. Well, not when it comes to financing. So during 2006, 7, 8, those tough times, we had special loans. So we had what was known as pick a pay. And pick a pay meant you picked your payment. And what was your choice on your payment? Well, your choice on your payment was that initial teaser rate. So you had like 6 months at a much lower rate. Could have been like 2 or 3%. And you could go ahead and make that payment. You could do a fully amortizing payment, which was mortgage payment with principal and interest. Nobody did that. Oh, to make things easier, how about the negative amortization payment? What's a negative amortization payment? Do you remember any of this, all-nighter? You got some good stuff. All-nighter, can't wait to talk about this. Negative amortization means that you are making a payment that is so low, it's a legal payment, but it's so low that you're actually you're only paying interest, or you're paying a portion of interest, you're adding to the principal. So you took out a $100,000 loan on a property with a negative amortization loan. You make a payment, and let's say it adds $200 to the principal. So you were getting even more upside down in making payments. So that was the pick a pay. That was a lovely thing. How about the 105% mortgage? So back then, you wanted to buy a property, you didn't need a down payment. No. And you didn't have to do a 0 down payment. No, you could do 105%. And that meant that you got paid 5%. Yes, you signed the paperwork, closed on a house, you got paid 5% to buy the house. So those are some issues. And 100% financing, what did that mean? Well, that meant there were 2 loans, a loan for 20% and a loan for 80% of value. And long story short, what ended up happening is you give out loans to people who shouldn't have loans. People buy 4 or 5 houses, and then they start to not be able to make payments, can't refi anymore, and value started to drop, had way too much inventory. And that's what we're seeing when we see 1,215. We can basically see that's how many properties are going back. Whew. All right, so let's see what all-nighters got. This is fun. All-nighter, I need to have you on this darn show. Okay. All right. So all-nighter doesn't have any experience with lot lines that have gone awry. That's good. That's good. Stay about it. Stay away. Foreclosure funnel. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute because it's fun to give you a full perspective on the market. And he's working away. Keep on working. Millennial Mike is your investment partner. That's cool. Out of state investing. All right. Let's see what else. All-nighter. Oh, here we go. This is a good question from MFI Wick. Curious about foldable homes that come from China. I'm in rural Riverside. There are some 20 by 20 or 20 by 40 unfolded homes. Yeah, I've seen these on Amazon. And one of the, so you're contacted by the company in China. They send it here to use the connections. So it is a form. Oh, and the pricing's not accurate on Amazon. It's used to entice people. That does make sense. So it's a form of panelized manufactured home. Manufactured homes tend to have a bad reputation, but you build something in a factory, it is going to actually theoretically be a tighter fit than something stick built. We can debate that. Stick built is when you build it on site. So these foldable homes are a form of manufactured panelized homes. So you can ship walls, you can ship panels, or you can ship an entire house that's in a box. Now, the funny thing is some of those floor plans I saw didn't have bathrooms. So you got to make sure you have bathrooms. A couple other important things. Number one is you're going to need to put a foundation there and you're going to have utility hookups. And then number two, you're going to have to make sure that it meets the local codes for construction. So that's a big deal. I don't know if some of these homes, these foldable homes, are going to work. I do know a lot of manufactured home companies do ensure that their products meet local building codes, but I'm not sure the foldable ones from China will. So go into the planning desk and talk to them about those homes, show them an example, and maybe it will. And make sure you get one with a bathroom. There's no point in not having a bathroom. So all-nighter, global financial crisis where collateral went sour, requiring margin calls, so to speak. Yeah. U.S. housing crisis is a symptom of much larger concerns. That's it. It's going to be, Elise talking about bragging about a 1% mortgage. Yeah, it was. I guarantee it. So yeah, back then that 1% mortgage, that was the teaser rate. Your first 6 months, you got that teaser rate, and then it went ahead and it reset, and that's when people would start making the negative amortization payments. Yeah, not a good time. All-nighters camera ready. Thanks, Millennium Mike. I appreciate the shout out and the cash there. Thank you. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I appreciate the super chat. Yeah, all-nighter should be on here. He's worked hard in the real estate world, and he is putting deals together. I love his creativity. So yeah, let me pull up the foreclosure funnel while we're here. Hope you guys are having fun. I'm having fun. Thanks for coming out. Like I said, I know there's a lot of other things to be doing tonight, unless you're using me for procrastination, which I guess is fine. I'm kind of procrastinating too by doing this. So let me pull up the foreclosure funnel. Okay, I'm gonna actually pull up two. So here's the foreclosure funnel as I originally presented it, but I have a more exciting version that I'm gonna use. So I've been using Gemini Nano Banana, and it is absolutely amazing what it can do. So this is the one I want to use. So this is the same foreclosure funnel, but we've given it a donut look. So this, all the same data. It's so freaking creative. Talk about AI replacing jobs. Okay, so what's the foreclosure funnel? I talk about this on foreclosure.com live stream with my buddy Tim Jones. Great company. They're great for tracking. So the foreclosure funnel is a way to look at the entire market, because the entire market isn't just made up of properties that are in foreclosure. So the very top, we basically have a funnel, in this case made out of donuts, and we have little houses falling into the funnel, also made out of donuts. So the very first group in the foreclosure funnel, the biggest group, is the folks who are going to miss a payment. So they're going to get behind on mortgage, property taxes, HOA dues, insurance. So, and let's talk about those. If you miss some of these payments, different things happen. And that's an important point. So if you miss your property insurance payment, your lender is not going to be happy if you have a loan. So your lender is going to force you to have insurance. And if you get dropped or you stop paying it, they're going to find a policy for you, and they may actually tack that on. Like when you sign the loan documents, you are required, you're saying I'm going to have insurance, and insurance of a sufficient level. So that's what happens there. HOA dues, if you happen to be in a homeowners association, that's a big deal. We actually had a lot of foreclosures where the HOA actually ended up foreclosing on the property. In the beginning of the global financial crisis, when we had people behind on the first and second mortgages and behind on HOA dues, HOAs were settling for less, just as the first and the second were. And what I mean by this is $500,000 house, $600,000 in loans. So the first loan would take a haircut, second loan would take a haircut. And the HOA dues that hadn't been paid for 6 months that added up to, let's say, $2,500, they were willing to settle for less. They'd take $500. Well, they wisened up. Because of their priority and the fact that they can foreclose, they hired these law firms, or vice versa. These law firms helped them wisen up. And the HOAs stopped settling and only accepted full HOA payment, which they needed to on some level because the HOAs were short on cash, and that was leading to other issues for the association. So crazy times. Property taxes, if you miss your property taxes, what happens? Well, first you get, and this is for non-impounded. So many loans, there's impounds, and impounds are where you send in one payment and the lender's going to send money to pay for the insurance. They're going to send money to pay for the property taxes. You still have to pay your own HOA dues. So if you have impounds, one payment, lender takes care of it. If you don't have impounds, then you're in charge of making these individual payments. And what ends up happening is if you miss property taxes, so if you were basically at a point where you weren't impounding, or even if you were impounding and you just stopped making your payment, your property taxes weren't being paid. So the lenders, to protect their position, in many cases would pay your property taxes and add that to what you owed them. If you don't pay your property taxes, eventually you're going to have an auction. The penalties are going to add up, and you're going to have an auction on your property. That is a long process. Not to discourage you not to pay property taxes, but if you don't pay them, it's not like you have to worry that you're going to be foreclosed on in a few months. Missing your mortgage goes through, like we talked about, the 120, 90, 21 day process at the fastest. So right now, all across America, there are people who are going to miss a payment. They may know it already because they just lost their job, or they're going to lose their job, or insurance, health insurance, depending on what happens there, they're not going to be able to afford to make payments anymore. There's a lot of factors. So this group of going to miss a payment is the biggest group, whether they know it or not. Then the next layer, level 2, and I'll go faster on this. We're not going to be here for 6 hours. Next group, they have actually missed a payment. So they've missed one of these important payments, usually most important being the mortgage. That's when the clock starts ticking. Then, as we said, the notice of default. So the notice of default is the first public notice that people have missed a payment. You and I do not know for sure if someone has missed a mortgage payment until the notice of default is filed. Now, we can tell if they stop paying their property taxes. I've found that before. But you and I, looking from the outside, aren't going to know. And it could be 6 months. It could be a year where they're not making payments, because there's a lot of loss mitigation process that needs to be done, particularly with Fannie and Freddie back loans. FHA and VA, those loans had special loss mitigation. Loss mitigation is basically what that means is somebody misses a payment, you got to figure out ways to help them stay in their home, mitigate a loss of the home and a loss of payments. So special processes, and there were special protections during COVID. Those actually just expired last year for VA and recently for FHA. FHA loans, as we've shown you when we've done our foreclosure updates, those are actually in the highest number of loans that are late. It's FHA loans. It's the low down payment loans. In particular, people who bought 2022 to the present, they don't have much equity. So notice of default will be the first time you know, then the notice of trustee sale. Things are getting serious. Then the trustee sale. These dates are often pushed. It does happen where they get pushed. Any one of these dates, the notice of default, notice trustee sale, or trustee sale can be pushed. But sometimes they go fast. Like when Elon Musk foreclosed on Gene Wilder's home, because Elon Musk sold Gene Wilder's former home to one of Gene Wilder's relatives, and then that relative didn't make payments. So Elon Musk actually foreclosed on this person, and he used the minimums. He used 120, 90, 21. His attorneys did. So that one moved right on schedule. So auction comes, then we have something unique in California called SB 1079, and that is the possibility of purchasing a property after trustee sale for qualified buyers, including the tenant, if there was a tenant that lived there, and then an owner occupant, if an owner occupant wants to buy it. It has to be all cash, not easy to do. Assuming it gets through SB 1079, and it would either go then back to the bank, it would be an REO, or it would be purchased by a third party. So the difference today, so that's the full foreclosure funnel. Hopefully that helps kind of explain the whole foreclosure process. A lot of donut houses going in during the global financial crisis. We don't have a lot of donut houses going in right now, more normal levels, but definitely just something to keep tracking, especially with FHA. And the big difference today is equity. The people selling in many cases have some equity. Now, those who bought 2022 to present may not have as much if they used a low down payment loan. So those folks may not have equity, particularly when you factor in the cost of sale, but a lot more equity. Folks in the global financial crisis, everybody upside down. So, okay. So, there's a funny question. We'll go after this. Okay. So understand HOAs have a good point in why they exist, but they get a bad rap as they incentivize to make a profit, or those who are in charge of it. I've seen videos on YouTube where they are crazy. Yeah, HOAs. So you have separate components to homeowners associations. They have their CC&Rs, and they are supposed to enforce those rules. So the HOA board and the HOA management company, they're two separate things. They're supposed to enforce those rules. So that's where things can get crazy. And then the board, which is usually made up of homeowners, some of those folks have nothing else going on in life, so they can be on a power trip and make life difficult for others. There's this big lawsuit over a tiny cross that cost a fortune. Attorneys made a fortune of it. Crazy stories, and you may have seen that one. And then the management company is supposed to be there for the board and supposed to be there to help enforce things. And there's some of the management companies are awful. So yeah, a lot of layers to HOAs. They can be good. They can help maintain some semblance of similarity in the homes. You don't have to worry about a neighbor putting a pink polka dots on their house, but and then if there's common amenities that add to the value of all the homes within the neighborhood, or they pay for security guards, things like that, it could be worth it, but you have to make that decision. So Nick wants a great question. If you have a kid that you want outside because they annoy you, how would you do that? I think this is another. If you have a tenant, they annoy you, how would you get them out? So the kid question's a good one. I have 4 kids. That's where I call my wife and say, babe, can you get the kids out of here? They're annoying me. They learned early on when I was shooting videos at home to quiet down. So anyway, now if you a tenant that annoys you, that's a very good question. I actually do get this question. At the end of the day, you have to be careful that you follow the local landlord tenant law. There may be special requirements related to the tenancy. You're going to have to honor the lease. So if they have a 12-month lease, as long as they're making payments on time and not causing a nuisance, which nuisance has a legal definition of essentially making life difficult for neighbors in particular and you. If they're not causing a nuisance, you can't get them out. If they're annoying because they call you about little odds and ends, that's not technically the legal definition of nuisance. So you're going to have to discuss with an attorney if there's a legal way to get them out. But that's, to be honest, being a landlord, that's part of it, that you are going to be stuck with people that you don't necessarily like and that annoy you on some level. And that's the cost of doing business. Like any job you have, like, hey, your coworkers and whatever job you have or had have annoyed you. That's quite frankly what rental laws are. Now, if you're in a tough spot like LA and it's a rent stabilized property, forget it. There's almost no way to get them out. It would have to be extreme. Even in cases of criminality, it's still the burdens on the landlord. So anyway, part of the fun of being a landlord. Yanira, thanks. I'm glad that helped out. This is fun stuff. And then let's see, all-nighter. Yeah, how can an HOA charge bills for blight impacting property values unless the HOA is holding property owners indemnified against a loss of value? Just something to consider. Not real. Yeah, it's interesting that they can go after people for blight and other things. But yeah, at the end of the day, that's one of your criteria when you're choosing what you're going to buy is you have to look at the HOA. In California, you get a copy of the HOA documents. That's part of due diligence. And I encourage you not to ignore that giant packet. A lot of people do. There's a few things in there. There's the CC&Rs. There's a form that tells you whether or not there's a lawsuit. Lawsuits, by the way, can make a property uninsurable and very tough to sell. There's also tells you about the insurance itself. Is the insurance sufficient for replacement costs? If it's not sufficient, then Fannie and Freddie won't back it. You have to go with special financing for that. A non-warrantable condo financing. The other big one that some people just don't really even know is there is the 12 most recent it's 12 months of the most recent meetings. So they may not meet every month. So if they meet every 2 months, it's 6 meetings. But take a look at there, see if there's anybody who's a pain in the butt in those. And then what you can do too is you can take all that giant stack that'll come to you as a link, put it into ChatGPT or Gemini and have it summarize. Look for things that are important, like if you want to have a grill and that's important to you, make sure you can have a grill. So search for that, have it review the budget, see if it pulls any red flags, things like that. So that's part of your due diligence on a property that is in an HOA. And then your lifestyle. So again, amenities would be a big deal. If it has amenities that it pays for, that could be a good thing. The other big thing, like Yanira was talking about, is a second home. If you're not going to be there all the time, you may want to have what's known as the lock and leave, meaning that you can lock the doors and not worry about the property. Very often those are in HOAs, particularly buildings, for example, which will have an HOA. So anyway, good stuff. Okay, so what do we got? You guys some of you are still hanging in there, about 45 minutes. This is fun. I like this. We'll do more of these because I like random questions. I'm just looking at some of my other stuff right now to see. Let's talk about maximum rent increase. And then if everybody wants to leave, we can. I know Michelle's ready to go. Just kidding, Michelle. I know you're not. You love this. Okay. Mortgage rates dropped slightly. That was interesting. Powell was talking about housing and how that is cutting the interest rate by a quarter point's not going to help housing, which he's 100% right. So anyway, there's some fun stuff to talk about. So let's talk about maximum rent increases. This is under the Tenant Protection Act. And you're seeing my whole account right now. That's fine. This is my Canva. I'll zoom in. So this is under the Tenant Protection Act for August 1st, 2025 to July 31st, 2026. And the long and the short of it is, here's the groups of properties that exist. There is the property that is exempt from all rent control. So it tends to be single families, homes, and condos. There are properties that are subject to statewide rent control. So that's duplexes, tend to be triplexes and larger. Then there's local rent control. At the end of the day, no matter what I am talking about right now for rent increases, local rent control trumps it. So that's where you have, for example, LA City, RSO, rent stabilized ordinance, properties of a certain age, you are limited on what you can do as far as an increase. In fact, it's going to be 90% of CPI with a minimum of 1% and a maximum of 4%. So that will be the RSO properties. There will be Tenant Protection Act properties. And as of right now, that's an 8% increase you can see for LA and Orange County. It's based on the CPI plus 5%. Riverside, San Bernardino, 7.5%. San Diego, 8.8%. That's the highest. Alameda, these others, 6.3%. And then if it's not specifically called out in my list, it falls in all other counties, 7.7%. So that would be for the year. That's the maximum you can do for properties subject to the Tenant Protection Act. If they are exempt from the Tenant Protection Act, which again, a lot of condos and houses in non-rent controlled areas are, if they are exempt from the Tenant Protection Act and the appropriate language has been given, oh yeah, and there's another big group, and that's properties with a certificate of occupancy 15 years or newer. So it could be a 500-unit apartment building that's brand new, exempt from the Tenant Protection Act. You can raise the rent as much as you want in a year. So it's going to be a 30-day notice for an increase of 10% or less. Anything above 10% within a 12-month period is a 90-day notice. People still think it's 60. It's not. It's 90. So that's talking about rents. Nick's got another good question. Got the kids out of the house. How do you handle a mold issue at a property, and what risks are there for a landlord? So the four-letter word, a lot of four-letter words. Mold is one of the worst. So you're going to want to carefully document everything. Once you hear there's potentially mold, any testing, you're going to want to carefully document everything and continue to work with your renter. Do not ignore this issue. You may want to reach out to your insurance company. Don't forget, as far as insurance goes, there is a different policy for landlords versus renters. So depending on how severe the mold is, you may want to have an insurance company help pay for it. If it's a tiny debatable issue, just hire a good company. For example, ServPro, they will properly remediate it. But if it's a massive leak that is potentially turned into a huge mold problem, then you're going to want to involve the insurance company and remediate. But yeah, hire professionals to remediate. Be communicative, meaning like don't leave your tenant hanging. That the more you communicate, and this is from Kenny, the eviction attorney, is like, you don't want to necessarily leave the tenant hanging. You want to be the last one to say something back to the tenant. And it's not like last word type of thing, but like always be following up until it's remediated. And then disclose it. So when you lease to a new renter, there's a spot to disclose that. And on some of the California Association of Realtors paperwork, disclose it. If there were elevated levels of mold, it's worth noting that, and then noting it was professionally remediated. That's going to protect you. So what's this? Can you buy renters and flood insurance on behalf of your tenants? That's actually a great question. So the short answer is probably. It's you, as a landlord, at least you should definitely require that they have renters insurance and put that in the lease. You could pay for it. I mean, the policies are relatively inexpensive. You can get a policy through Lemonade. The challenge, and I'm not affiliated, it's just they're cheap policies. The challenge you have is you don't necessarily know exactly what the renter has. So I could see in a weird world, and we live in a weird world, where you bought a policy that was insufficient because you didn't know every electronic device they had and it didn't cover that. And maybe you'd end up being liable. I doubt it. And then flood insurance. So flood insurance is one of those things. So a tenant, that would be something you could require for the renter's insurance, that it covers flood. Same thing, you could require earthquake insurance if you want with their renter's insurance. Anything related to renters, it's probably worth doing. Flood insurance, as some people know, is something you don't always think you need. You think, oh, hey, I'm sitting here and I'm not in a flood zone, I'm fine. There's things that happen that are considered floods that you wouldn't necessarily know on the face of it. One of the more extreme examples was Laguna Beach, Road Bluebird Canyon. Basically, there was a bunch of water that got underneath the dirt on the side of a mountain, and an entire road with tons of houses slid down the side of a mountain. So the mountain is well above the ocean. You're way high up. You'd never think, oh, hey, I need flood insurance. Mass wasting, which is what that's defined as, that required flood insurance. So those folks who lost a house and the land, they didn't have land anymore. That was an example where if they didn't have flood insurance, they weren't covered. So, okay, I knew All Nighter was going to say this. Hold on, All Nighter. I knew it. Where did he go? Where did he go? This is funny. Where is he? There it is. Because he said this before, and I agree with him. If you're not certified to tag mold, then always call it mildew, much cheaper. I think he's right. Yeah, we can't say for sure something's mold unless an expert says it is. And then, yeah, so the question dovetailing into the mold, do you need to test the mold or just remediate? So what I would do, an all-nighter, I'd like your opinion, but I would hire a company that can test and remediate, and having that report, and then give the report to the renter so they have it. So it's not like you're trying to hide anything. And if the report still shows there's mold after the remediation, tell the company you hired, hey, dudes and dudettes, I hired you to remediate this, fix it. So have them fix the problem, make sure the mold test is successful. Now, here where it gets complicated, and I'm going deep, but where it gets complicated is you hire a company and then the renter hires a company. Two different people do tests. The tests are vary. So look, it can become a slippery slope. So find the best company you have. Then you really should just get the issue taken care of. Don't let leaks go. Tell your renters and put that in the lease that if there's a leak, they need to tell you immediately. So Yanira says, if a friend needs electric, termite, plumbing work, in which order would you do it? Asking for a friend. So great question. The termite work can happen before any other work happens or after, particularly a tenting. So you can actually do a ton of work and then tent at the end. And tenting is where you put a circus tent over it, and they pump it with a gas like Vicane. If it's local treatment, again, it could happen at any point in time. Electrical and plumbing, depending on how dramatic it is, it would be something where these guys could actually, if you wanted to coordinate it. So let's say you're not going to tent. Let's say it's going to be local treatment. Have the electrician and the plumber come in, poke holes, and do what they're going to do, and then get the termite company there to do some local treatment in those areas if they feel it needs it. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. The order there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just get it done and make sure you can do it with permits. That's the best way. So All Nighter's got Steadily Insurance is who he recommends for insurance. Lemonade's another one. There's a few others. All right. So this was fun. Thank you guys. I appreciate you coming out. So this is the first Ask Me About Real Estate that we've done. We're going to do more of these. So this is the first and last one in 2025, but look for more of these in 2026. Of course, come to our other live streams. We have one more next week. We're actually going to have Rick Sharga on. Rick's amazing. You guys have seen him on the news. He talks about foreclosures, talks about the housing market. We're going to get Rick's impression of where we've been 2025 and what to expect for 2026. So I'm excited about that. Then we're going to go dark a little bit for the holidays, but then we're going to come raging back with information and knowledge and a whole lot more. So can't thank you enough for the support this year. Can't wish you enough an amazing holiday season. Enjoy the family and friends. And then all nighter will get you on. Yeah, you'll have more time on the next one. That you better have enough time. We'll get you on here live. It'll be fun. All right. Thank you guys very much for coming out. This has been Christian Walsh, real estate agent with Wire Associates, and we can't wait to work with